Hi everyone, I'm in a really difficult situation and could use some advice. This is going to be a long post, so I apologize in advance. I'm a 45-year-old woman, and I recently got married to my boyfriend, Mark, 49M, who I've been dating for 3 years. Mark has an 18-year-old daughter, Jessica, who has never liked me. The situation with Jessica has been challenging from the start, and things have only gotten worse recently. I met Mark at a local community center where we both volunteered. I was helping out with an after-school tutoring program, and he was coaching a youth basketball team. We kept running into each other and started chatting. I was immediately drawn to his kind nature and sense of humor. I remember the first time we really talked. I was struggling to carry a heavy box of textbooks, and Mark offered to help. As we walked, he told me about how he'd started volunteering to set a good example for his daughter. I was touched by his dedication as a father. We ended up talking for over an hour that day, losing track of time. After a few weeks of these chance encounters, he asked me out for coffee. I was hesitant at first. I'd been single for a while and wasn't sure if I was ready to date again. But there was something about Mark that made me feel comfortable, so I agreed. Our first date was at a little cafe near the community center. I was nervous, but Mark put me at ease with his easygoing manner. We talked about our volunteering, our jobs. I work as a librarian, he's an architect, and our shared love of hiking. The conversation flowed naturally, and before I knew it, 3 hours had passed. At the time, I was still recovering from a painful divorce that had been finalized about 5 years earlier. My ex-husband, Tom, and I had been college sweethearts. We married young, just after graduation. For the first few years, things were good. We were building our careers and our life together, but as time went on, we started growing apart. Tom became more and more focused on his job as a corporate lawyer. He was working long hours and bringing work home on weekends. I felt like I was living with a stranger. We tried counseling, but it didn't help much. Then, about 8 years ago, Tom came home one night and confessed he'd been having an affair with a coworker. It had been going on for months. I was devastated. I'd suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined he'd cheat. The next few months were a blur of tears, arguments, and meetings with divorce lawyers. Tom moved out, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my life. The betrayal shook me to my core. I struggled with depression and had to start seeing a therapist. It took me a long time to feel ready to date again. I had a few short-lived relationships, but nothing serious. I was scared of getting hurt again. But with Mark, it was different. He was patient and understanding about my past, which made me feel safe opening up to him. Mark had his own painful history. His wife, Sarah, had passed away from breast cancer when Jessica was 10 years old. He'd been raising Jessica on his own for the past 8 years, and it was clear they had a very close bond. Mark told me about how hard it had been to watch Sarah go through chemo, trying to stay strong for Jessica while dealing with his own grief. After Sarah died, he'd thrown himself into being the best dad he could be. He learned to braid Jessica's hair, helped her with school projects, and never missed a soccer game. I admired how devoted he was as a father. It was one of the things that attracted me to him. I could see how much he loved Jessica, and I hoped that love could extend to include me too. When Mark first introduced me to Jessica, I tried my best to be friendly and respectful. I knew I could never replace her mother, and I didn't want to try. I just hoped we could develop a positive relationship over time. I remember that first meeting clearly. Mark had invited me over for dinner. I was nervous, wanting to make a good impression. I'd brought a small gift for Jessica, a book I thought she might like based on what Mark had told me about her interests. Jessica was polite when Mark introduced us, but I could feel the tension. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and she barely looked at me throughout dinner. When I gave her the book, she muttered a quiet thanks and set it aside without really looking at it. From the beginning, Jessica was cold and dismissive towards me. She'd barely respond when I tried to talk to her, and she'd often leave the room when I came in. If Mark and I were watching TV together, she'd pointedly put on headphones and ignore us. I tried not to take it personally at first. I figured she was still grieving her mom and struggling with seeing her dad with someone new. I gave her space and tried to let her warm up to me gradually. I'd ask about her interests in school, offer to help with homework, or suggest fun activities we could do together. Once, I noticed Jessica seemed stressed about an upcoming history test. I offered to help her study, mentioning that I'd majored in history in college. She just rolled her eyes and said, "No offense, but I don't think you'd know anything about modern teaching methods." It stung, but I tried to brush it off. Another time, I invited Jessica to come hiking with Mark and me. I thought it might be nice to share an activity as a family. Jessica agreed, which surprised me. But during the hike, she stayed far ahead of us on the trail, refusing to engage in conversation. When we stopped for lunch, she put in earbuds and ignored us the whole time. As my relationship with Mark got more serious, Jessica's behavior towards me worsened. She'd make snide comments about my appearance or age. Once when I was cooking dinner, she loudly complained that it smelled awful and ordered takeout instead. She'd intentionally exclude me from conversations or inside jokes with Mark. I remember one particularly hurtful incident. It was Jessica's 16th birthday, and I'd spent weeks planning a surprise party for her. I invited her friends, decorated the house, and baked her favorite cake. When Jessica got home and saw the surprise, she looked right past me to Mark and said, "Dad, why did you let her do this? You know I hate surprises." She then went to her room and refused to come out for the rest of the night. It was clear she resented my presence in their lives. I tried talking to Mark about it, but he always made excuses for her behavior. He'd say she was just going through a phase, or that she needed more time to adjust. I could see it was hard for him to acknowledge the extent of the problem. Things came to a head when Mark and I got engaged. We'd been dating for about 2 years at that point. Mark proposed during a weekend trip to the beach. It was romantic and perfect. We were both so happy. But that happiness was short-lived. When we told Jessica about the engagement, she threw a huge tantrum. She screamed at Mark that he was betraying her mother's memory. She accused me of trying to replace her mom and said I'd been manipulating Mark all along. She told him if he married me, she'd never speak to him again. Mark was distraught, but stood firm in his commitment to me. He tried to reason with Jessica, assuring her that he'd always love her and that I wasn't trying to replace her mom. But she wouldn't listen. She locked herself in her room and refused to come out for days. In the months leading up to the wedding, Jessica did everything she could to sabotage our relationship. She'd forget to pass on important messages from Mark to me. If I asked her to tell Mark I'd be home late from work, she'd conveniently forget, leading to worry and arguments. She spread rumors among family friends that I was a gold digger after Mark's money. She told Mark's parents that I'd made disparaging comments about Sarah, which was completely untrue. It caused a lot of tension with Mark's family, who had been welcoming to me before. She even created a fake social media profile and sent me harassing messages, though we eventually figured out it was her. The messages were cruel, calling me old and ugly, saying Mark would realize his mistake and leave me. When confronted, Jessica denied it at first, then shrugged it off as just a joke. Despite all this, Mark and I were determined to make our relationship work. We went to family counseling, but Jessica refused to participate meaningfully. She'd sit silently during sessions or give one-word answers to the therapist's questions. I kept trying to connect with Jessica, but she rejected every overture. I'd invite her to go shopping or get manicures together, things I thought teenage girls might enjoy. She always had an excuse not to go. If I bought her gifts, I'd later find them in the trash. It broke my heart to see the pain this was causing Mark, torn between his daughter and our relationship. He'd confide in me late at night, worried that he was failing as a father. I tried to reassure him, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. When our wedding day arrived, Jessica refused to attend. It cast a shadow over what should have been the happiest day of our lives. Mark was crushed that his daughter wasn't there to see him get married. I felt horrible, wondering if I was to blame for this rift between them. The ceremony was beautiful, but I could see the sadness in Mark's eyes when he looked at the empty seat where Jessica should have been. We'd left it open, hoping she might change her mind at the last minute. She didn't. After the ceremony, Mark suggested we bring Jessica on our honeymoon to Morocco. He thought it might be a chance for us to bond as a family. I was hesitant at first. I'd been looking forward to romantic time alone with my new husband. But I could see how much it meant to Mark, so I agreed. We made arrangements for Jessica to stay in a separate room on a different floor of the hotel, so Mark and I would still have privacy. I hoped that being in a new, exciting place might help Jessica open up and give me another chance. The flight to Morocco was tense. Jessica ignored me completely, speaking only to Mark. When we arrived at the hotel, she immediately went to her room, saying she was tired from the journey. The first day of the trip was uneventful. We all went sightseeing together, but Jessica kept to herself mostly. She was polite enough when we all had dinner together, but there was no real conversation. I tried to stay optimistic that things might improve. The next morning, I woke up to Jessica knocking on our hotel room door. She said she wanted to get breakfast, and Mark was still asleep. I was surprised she wanted to spend time with just me, but I readily agreed. Maybe this was a sign she was warming up to me after all. At the hotel restaurant, Jessica insisted on ordering for both of us. She said she'd heard about a special local dessert we had to try. When it arrived, it looked delicious, a pastry topped with ice cream and chocolate chips. In my sleepy morning state, I didn't think to ask about the ingredients. I took a big bite. Within minutes, my throat started to close up. I felt dizzy and nauseous. I realized with horror that the dessert must have contained peanut butter, which I'm severely allergic to. I managed to gasp out that I needed help before collapsing. The next few hours were a blur. I was rushed to the ER, where they treated me for anaphylactic shock. If I hadn't gotten medical attention so quickly, I could have died. When I was finally stabilized, Mark was there holding my hand, looking terrified. He told me that he'd investigated what happened. It turned out Jessica had specifically requested peanut butter in the dessert, even though she knew about my allergy. The hotel staff was horrified when they found out. They said if anyone had informed them of my allergy, they never would have served me that dessert. I felt sick to my stomach. And not just from the allergic reaction. I couldn't believe Jessica would deliberately try to harm me like that. Part of me didn't want to believe it. Surely she wouldn't go that far. But the evidence was clear. Mark was livid. He'd had a long, intense conversation with Jessica while I was being treated. He told her that her behavior was completely unacceptable and dangerous. He said he was sending her home immediately and that going forward, he would only pay for her college tuition. She'd have to support herself otherwise. I felt awful seeing Mark have to discipline his daughter like that. Despite everything, I knew how much he loved her. But I also felt relieved that he was finally drawing a firm line. Jessica's actions could have killed me. Clearly, the situation couldn't go on as it had been. The rest of our honeymoon was subdued. We tried to enjoy Morocco, but the incident cast a pall over everything. We visited the markets in Marrakesh and took a day trip to the Atlas Mountains, but my heart wasn't in it. I kept replaying the incident in my mind, wondering if there were signs I'd missed. Should I have been more cautious? Was there something else I could have done to improve my relationship with Jessica? Mark was attentive and caring, but I could tell he was struggling too. He was angry at Jessica, but also grieving the relationship he wished we could all have. We spent a lot of time talking through our feelings and trying to figure out how to move forward. Now we're home, and I'm not sure what to do next. Jessica is still living with us for now, at least until college starts in the fall. The atmosphere in the house is tense and uncomfortable. Jessica barely speaks to me, acting like I don't exist. She hasn't apologized or shown any remorse for what happened. I want to support Mark in reconnecting with his daughter, but I'm also scared of what she might do next. The incident in Morocco showed she's willing to put my health at risk. I don't feel safe in my own home anymore. Mark is trying his best to mediate, but I can tell he's torn. He wants to believe Jessica will come around eventually, but he's also worried about my well-being. We're considering family therapy again, but I'm not sure Jessica will agree to participate. I love Mark deeply, and I want to make this marriage work. But I'm at a loss for how to handle the situation with Jessica. Has anyone dealt with something similar? How do you mend a relationship with a stepchild who seems to hate you? Is there any hope of us becoming a real family, or am I fooling myself? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for reading this far. Edit. Thank you all for your supportive comments and advice. I've read through everything and am taking it to heart. I wanted to post an update on the situation as some significant things have happened in the past 2 weeks. Update: Mark and I have been home for about 2 weeks now. Things with Jessica haven't improved much, I'm sad to say. She's still barely speaking to me, acting as if I don't exist in the house. What's most concerning is that she doesn't seem apologetic at all about what happened in Morocco. If anything, she seems angrier than before. I think a lot of her anger is now directed at me because of Mark's decision to cut her off financially, except for tuition. She seems to blame me entirely for this, even though it was Mark's choice in response to her dangerous behavior. The first few days after we got back were incredibly tense. Jessica stayed in her room most of the time, only coming out for meals. When she did, she'd ignore me completely, speaking only to Mark if she had to. I tried to give her space, hoping she might come around if I didn't push. One evening, I overheard her talking on the phone to a friend. She was complaining about me, saying I'd ruined everything and that her dad had chosen me over her. It hurt to hear, but it also gave me some insight into how she was feeling. Mark has tried talking to her several times, but she just shuts down or lashes out. I remember one particularly heated argument where Jessica accused Mark of forgetting about her mother. She said he was trying to erase their past and create a new family without her. Mark was devastated by this accusation. We looked into family therapy again, but Jessica refused to participate. She said there was no point since she'd be leaving for college soon anyway. Mark and I have been going to couples counseling to work through our own feelings about the situation. It's been helpful, but I wish Jessica would join us. The tension in the house has been unbearable. I've been trying to give Jessica space, staying out of her way as much as possible. But it's exhausting walking on eggshells in my own home all the time. I've started spending more time at work or out of the house just to avoid the uncomfortable atmosphere. I've also been dealing with some anxiety since the incident in Morocco. I find myself double-checking ingredients obsessively, even for foods I've eaten many times before. I had a panic attack in a restaurant last week when I couldn't be sure if my meal was completely peanut-free. Mark has been supportive, but I can tell he's worried about me. Things came to a head yesterday. I was coming down the stairs when I overheard Jessica and Mark arguing in the living room. I paused, not wanting to interrupt. Jessica was yelling at Mark, saying he'd ruined her life by marrying me. She called me some pretty awful names I'd rather not repeat. I could hear the pain in Mark's voice as he tried to reason with her. He was pleading with her to give me a chance, to try and be part of our family. Jessica's voice was getting louder and more hysterical. She accused Mark of loving me more than her, of forgetting about her mother. The emotion in her voice was raw and painful to hear. I must have made a noise or something because suddenly they both realized I was there. Jessica's face twisted with anger when she saw me. Before I could react, she rushed towards me and shoved me hard. I lost my balance and fell backwards down the stairs. Everything happened so fast. I remember a sharp pain in my head, and then everything went black. I woke up in the ER again. The doctors told me I had a concussion and some bruising, but thankfully no broken bones. They wanted to keep me overnight for observation just to be safe. Mark has been by my side the whole time, looking devastated. He told me that after I fell, he called an ambulance immediately. While we were waiting, he told Jessica to pack her things and leave. He said he couldn't have her in the house anymore if she was going to be physically violent. I feel terrible that it's come to this. Despite everything, I never wanted Jessica to be kicked out of her home. I know how much Mark loves her, and I worry about how this will affect their relationship long term. At the same time, I'm relieved. The idea of going back to that house with Jessica there was terrifying. I hate feeling unsafe in my own home. And clearly the situation had become dangerous, not just emotionally, but physically. The doctors say I should be able to go home tomorrow. Mark and I have a lot to discuss about what happens next. I'm not sure where Jessica is staying right now, probably with her grandparents. I don't know if Mark will try to reconcile with her again, or if this is a more permanent estrangement. I'm feeling overwhelmed and unsure of everything. The physical pain from the fall is nothing compared to the emotional turmoil. I keep replaying the moment Jessica pushed me, trying to understand how we got to this point. Was there something more I could have done? Is there any way to repair this relationship? Part of me wonders if I should just leave to make things easier for Mark and Jessica to repair their relationship. But I love Mark, and we've worked so hard to build a life together. I don't want to give up on our marriage. I guess I'm looking for advice again. How do we move forward from here? Is there any way to salvage the situation with Jessica? Or is it time to accept that she may never be part of our lives? How do I support Mark through this estrangement from his daughter? I'm also struggling with my own feelings towards Jessica. I've tried so hard to be understanding, to give her time and space. But after this physical attack, I'm finding it hard not to be angry and resentful. How do I process these emotions in a healthy way? Mark and I have barely had time to talk about everything that's happened. He's been focused on making sure I'm okay and dealing with the immediate aftermath of the incident. But I know we need to have some serious conversations about our future once I'm out of the hospital. Thank you all again for listening and for any insights you can offer. This whole situation has been so difficult, and I really appreciate having a place to talk about it. I'll update again when I know more about what's going to happen next.